over the course of your lifetime, roughly 50% of everything you ever earn will be taken from you in taxes.
Dominic Frisby. You're a comedian. I love some of your stuff. It's very, very funny. When you do your songs.
You're a man of many skills, but one of the things is an author, and you are the author of Daylight Robbery.
Yeah.
Which is all about tax.
How have the taxes got so high?
Wars, debasement of currency. They say money makes the world go round, but tax has defined history. Most things that are wrong in the world can be traced back to some kind of government incompetence.
Is there some nefarious puppet stringing behind the scenes going on?
Tony Blair and Emmanuel Macron and Klaus Schwab and all the rest of them, they genuinely believe the world they're designing is better. I don't subscribe to that. So there is definitely an agenda of powerful people who are trying to impose their view on the world.
Is Bill Gates the Antichrist?
I mean, I think to become a billionaire, you've probably got to be a little bit of a psychopath and have a ruthless streak to you.
But before we dive into this, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn the notification bell on. Dominic, is tax illegal theft?
Well, it's legal theft. That's the great moral argument. Is taxation a form of theft, or is it the price we pay for a civilized society? And the answer's probably somewhere in between the two.
So how did it start then? Because I understand a few hundred years ago, most of the taxes we have in the current form didn't exist.
A lot of them didn't. Income tax didn't really exist, but the evidence is that, sadly, that taxation is as old as history itself. There's never been a civilization without some form of taxation. There have been examples of civilizations where taxation was voluntary, ancient Greece, for example, but today it's very, very, very compulsory, and it's taken by force. If you don't pay, you go to prison. In many cases, it's taken by stealth. If you think of stealth, you know, so many hidden taxes. Even in a way, income tax is taken by stealth. Inflation is obviously taken by stealth, but income tax is taken by stealth in the sense that many of us have it deducted at source before we've even actually received the money in our hands. So yes, and it's also taken without choice, in that you can't choose which taxes you want to pay and which you don't. In most cases, most taxes are, I mean, you could say you don't buy that product and you don't pay VAT. In that sense, there's a choice. But in most cases, it's not optional, it's compulsory.
So I'd love to dig into this.
Sure.
But I want to start because I know you've written multiple books, but one of them is called Daylight Robbery, and that gives one somewhat of an inkling of the way you feel about tax. So why did you call your book Daylight Robbery, and what is daylight robbery?
Well, we tend to think that daylight robbery means brazen theft, but there's actually quite a few arguments about where the origins of the word are, and some people think it dates back to the highwaymen. You know, think of Adamant and all, you know, of Dick Turpin and all that. But the more likely origin is that it refers to the window tax. And, you know, we've got lovely big windows behind us here, but once upon a time, we would have had to have paid lots and lots of tax on these windows. And so to avoid paying tax on windows, people blocked up their windows, or new houses were built without windows altogether. And so people lost their daylight. Now, in those days, there was no electricity. Lamps you lit with tallow candles, or in some cases oil lamps. But so to lose your daylight was no small sacrifice. And in fact, it made people ill, because in the Industrial Revolution, the damp, cramped, windowless dwellings added to the spread of cholera, typhus, and all those various diseases that hurt the poor. And like a lot of taxes, it was intended for the rich, but it hurt the poor the most. But anyway, when it was debated in Parliament, you know, and they've tried to get rid of it for 50 or 60 years, they tried to get rid of it. But when they debated in Parliament, MPs were believed to have cried out daylight robbery. But anyway, it was eventually got rid of, and we replaced it with income tax.
Is that any better?
Well, yes and no. Depends. I mean, you've probably heard of the tithe, which is this idea that you give a tenth of what you earn to church. But the tithe goes all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia. It predates the Old Testament. And it's thought it was a tithe because it was a tenth. We have 10 fingers. It was an easy number to calculate. But in olden times, people didn't necessarily handle money in the way that they do today. So you would give a tenth of your labour or a tenth of your produce. And so that's basically a form of income tax. But today, income tax is 45% for higher earners. With the debasement of money that's going on, more and more people are falling into that higher earner bracket. But there's also national insurance, which is a form of income tax. And so one way or another, over the course of your lifetime, roughly 50% of everything you ever earn will be taken from you in taxes. And of that, roughly 50% of government revenue around the world derives from income tax. It's the single biggest tax. As I say, it's compulsory. And you look at the life of the medieval serf, who was a descendant of the slaves, the Roman slaves, and he would give half of his week to his landlord, and half of his week he was allowed to till his own little bit of soil. So 50%, it's the same amount today. So in that respect, obviously life's got a lot better because we have many more things, and we're empowered by technology. We're able to do many more things than we were ever previously able to do. But in terms of time taken, our lot is not that different from that of the medieval serf. Although, as I say, working conditions have improved.
Right. I'm going to bring up something that I published a couple of weeks ago. It might take me a few seconds to find it. But I did this little rant on social media on tax. Because I probably thought the same as you, that maybe about 50% of our income is taxed. But then if you're a business owner, you've got, okay, VAT is an added tax, but there's still VAT. Then you've got corp tax, which is going up from 19 to 25, business rates, pension contributions. And then you look at everything that you buy that's got VAT on. You buy a car, it's got VAT on. You've got your car tax or your company car tax, yada, yada, yada.
Fuel duty,
which is what? About a fixed, it's about 40% at the moment of fuel.
I think that it may be slightly different, but roughly 75% of the price you pay at the pump is taxes in one form or other.
And then alcohol can be 80-odd% tax.
Cigarettes,
82% tax.
You've done your homework.
Because it's pissing me off, I'm just going to say, I don't know.
That's why I usually use that figure of 50%. It's probably slightly more. But you go to people, okay, what's the most expensive thing you ever buy in your life?
Probably your house.
That's what everyone says. And you even said it in the context of this conversation, but the most expensive purchase you ever make in your life is by far and away your government. By far and away.
But what are we getting for what we buy? At least I get something for my house.
A lot of bureaucracy.
Yeah, because Peter Schiff said to me, he said that he thinks the governments are too bloated and they've got far too many people employed. In fact, they just announced the cutting of 91,000 civil servant jobs, which they built up from 2016. What do you think? I'm going to come back to all this. We've got a few threads opening, so everyone, stay listening. This is going to go deep. But do you think the government are too bloated? There's too many of them. They're taking too much money?
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's too bloated by about 5 times.
Really?
Mm-hmm. If you look at government as a percentage of GDP at the turn of the 20th century, in other words, around about 1900, tax was about 10%. In fact, in the UK, it was about 8%. And the famous quote from A.J.P. Taylor is that an Englishman could walk through life and barely notice the existence of the state except for the post office and the policeman. You could go anywhere in the world without a passport. And, in a way, taxation's a measure of freedom. And so, if you have an anarchy with total freedom and no government, you have 0 taxes. And at the other extent, if you have a totalitarian regime, North Korea or something, where North Koreans don't own any of their own labour. We own about 50% of ours, so we're sort of somewhere in the middle of the two extremes. But government's getting bigger all the time, and don't forget debt, which is a tax on the future. You know, all these debt obligations, they spend way more than they take in taxation. That's going to have to be paid off one way or another.
How has the government then got so bloated, and how have the taxes got so high?
It all started with the National Insurance Act just before World War I. We only were able to go to war for as long as we did because we came off the gold standard, but because they went to fiat standards and printed the money, that war then went on and on and on.
Is it though? Because they used to basically be neutral, and if there was in a deficit, then they'd make that deficit up. But it just seems it's deficit.
Well, they'll pay it by debasing the currency, but it's still, you're still paying by losing the purchasing power.
Print more money.
Yeah.
Quantitative easing.
Yeah. And so that's where we are in the two extremes. And in my opinion, most government services could be better provided to a much higher standard at a much lower cost for a much broader section of people if there was no government involved.
So you mean if most of government was privatised, or do you just mean that a lot of what they do just isn't required?
Well, I'm very wary of using that word privatised, and this is no criticism of you.
Oh, no, please.
But when
Feel free to criticise me.
But when you see something like the trains, where a private company is ordered, is given a state monopoly, then the private company will milk it for all it's worth, and that's why you see such ridiculously high train fares. If it was totally liberalised and other people could lay down tracks and there was competition for the thing, the cost of rail travel would fall dramatically. And so privatisation often ends up with this sort of unhealthy half state, half private, which is the most crony capitalist rotten situation of the lot. What was it? I played football regularly on a Thursday evening in this football pitches down in Brixton, and it was owned by the council at one stage, but at some point the council sold it off, and there's like 3 different companies in charge of these football pitches, and one company is responsible for the maintenance of the pitches, so they have to relay the AstroTurf when it, tears up or whatever. There's another company responsible for the booking. And there's another company responsible, I don't even know what the other company is responsible. There's 3 companies running what is essentially a pretty simple business. You've got some football pitches, you rent them out, you make sure they're in decent condition. But for some reason, the council, in their wisdom, when they sold it off to these 3 different companies. And and I was just going, and it's hopeless. We've been playing in the game for 25 years, and always there's some reason or another why our game gets cancelled, and it's just so badly run. It's so inefficient, and it's so expensive for what it is. And it's just like the railways. When they sold off the railways, you had one guy responsible for maintaining the track, one guy running the trains, one guy responsible for something else. And there's always something that's sort of in the middle of where the 2 responsibilities lie, and that never gets fixed. And I just don't believe that would happen in a proper free market environment. So I'm quite purist about it, but
so
if you look at something like
markets.
education, 100%. If you look at something like education, people think we became literate as a result of education becoming compulsory in the sort of late 19th century. But the proof was that all through the Industrial Revolution, as people came from the fields in the country into the cities to work, and then gradually they earned money, and we were talking about a time when money was sound under the gold standard, so the purchasing power of money increased over the course of the 19th century. So salaries in real terms actually went up rather than down. But the first thing people spend their money on after they've, clothed themselves, provided shelter and fed themselves is self-improvement. And we went over the course of 50 or 60 years from, course of 2 generations basically, from being mostly illiterate to being something like 95% literacy, long before it ever became compulsory by the state. People go, today we have to have state education because otherwise people wouldn't be able to read or write. Well, I'm sorry, the free market, the internet, has provided the most powerful learning tool in the form of the internet ever created in all human history. And the idea that people are illiterate in this day and age today, when we've got phones and iPads and computers and words around us all the time, it's just rubbish. And so, even education, would be, you know, people go, well, we wouldn't have education. We would. We just wouldn't have it provided by the state, and it would be much better and much cheaper. So yes, I'm a big free marketeer person.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. I hadn't got it on my list, but I am fascinated by capitalism, and I think capitalism is the best system we've created, but I think it's imperfect. But I want to go back to the
There's
government.
no such thing as perfection.
That is very true. Except my wife. My wife is perfect.
And my Substack letter.
Which we'll also talk about soon. So what services that the government provide or use our money to fund do you think aren't required?
Well, it's heresy to say it, but I believe the NHS is not the best means to provide the best possible healthcare to the most possible people for the lowest possible price. I've already droned on about state education. If I go away to a Bitcoin conference and I start talking to all the anarcho-capitalist nut jobs, I come away thinking that we should have no government at all, and the free market can do everything better, and there's certainly a case for that. But probably at the end of the day, I'm what you'd call a classical liberal or a minarchist, and I think the government should be rather something like 10% of GDP, a bit like Adam Smith used to argue, you know, look after the defence of the nation, the police, and maybe infrastructure, roads and so on. But I don't even think we need government to build roads. It's always private contractors that build roads anyway. It's just the government that pays for them. But so, yeah, I in most cases, people acting out of their own self-interest in a voluntarist society would result in better outcomes than state.
How has the government then got so bloated, and how have the taxes got so high?
Wars, debasement of currency, largely. It all started with the National Insurance Act just before World War One. Then World War One, we only were able to go to war for as long as we did because we came off the gold standard. Same with France and Germany. If we'd all stayed on the gold standard, the war would have had to end when the gold ran out, but because they went to fiat standard and printed the money, that war then went on and on and on. Then after that war, the government had a responsibility to make good after the damage that had been done, to look after all the families who'd lost loved ones and so on. And then, you know, the First World War led to the Second World War, and we've just seen, you know, it just sort of spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. And I'm a big believer in the adage, fix money, fix the world. And yeah. Tax also makes war possible, but war also makes tax possible. Income tax never hit every man until World War One. It was only during World War One that every man started paying income tax, and indeed every woman. As women went into the workforce, they too started paying income tax. And the irony is, one of the key justifications why women got the vote was that women now paid tax, and therefore they should have a vote. And, you know, one of the things I argue in my book is that if you look at any great event in history, somewhere underneath it you will find some kind of tax story, without which that event would never have happened in the way that it did. And once you start to look at the world through the prism of taxation, loads and loads becomes clear. But every war in history was paid for by tax. Every conquest was about taking control of the tax base, the land, the labour, the produce, the profit. Every revolution was a rising up against some kind of injustice perpetrated by the tax system. Every religion, you know, the difference between God and king and ruler, most religions are a system of rule. They wouldn't exist without taxation. Mary and Joseph were only in Bethlehem to pay taxes. When Jesus was born, if Caesar Augustus hadn't levied that tax, they wouldn't have been there. The crime for which Jesus was eventually crucified was forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, i.e. non-payment of taxes. You know, taxes everywhere. The first men on the moon, NASA was a tax-funded operation. Tax is, you know, they say money makes the world go round, but tax has defined history.
Wow. So I'd like to look a bit later in this discussion at some solutions. But
I don't think there are any.
Well, surely we have to fight for some though.
Yeah.
Even if there aren't. And we haven't even talked about being self-employed or a business owner yet.
The solution is to leave, but I don't know where you go, but go and become a digital nomad and leave and escape the system. The more people that do it, then the less people will pay into the system. I should say the fewer people will pay into the system.
A lot of people seem to have a big issue with Bill Gates and how much he seems to be taking into his own hands.
I'll tell you where Bill Gates is an antichrist, patenting. That's where he made his fortunes. And, you know, again, I'm Mr. Free Market, and I think patents, they're quite crony capitalist.
Just a quick one. I have a digital financial toolkit for you that you can instantly download to make, manage and multiply money, build multiple streams of recurring income and increase your earnings. Now the link is in the description, it's completely free, it's my gift to you, so go and click the link in the description right now.
Totalitarian regime, New World Order, the Great Reset, oh nothing, be happy, Klaus Schwab. The amount of times I see all this stuff on my video feed. What's your theory on all of this? Is there some nefarious puppet stringing behind the scenes going on?
Well, that remark he said, we'll own nothing or you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, is one of the most misconstrued comments ever. He was talking about the rise of the rental economy rather than the owner economy. So, you know, you won't have a holiday home, you do Airbnb here one time and Airbnb there the next time. You won't own a car, you'll just hire a car when you need one, and so on and so forth. And, you know, driverless cars, and you'll just go on the app and call the driverless car. That's what he was talking about. So I do think he's been misconstrued. I'm not defending Klaus Schwab or the WEF because it is awful on so many different levels, but I'm a big never ascribe to malice that which can be explained as incompetence person, and I think a lot of what everyone's describing as a conspiracy is actually accidental. But then I talk to some of my conspiracy theory mates and they break my balls and they argue, and I'm going, come on, that wasn't deliberate, they just profited from the situation, and so on and so forth. But there is, you know, in the same way, for example, what the internet has made possible is that people of a similar mind congregate together. So, for example, if you think that Bitcoin fixes this and Bitcoin's wonderful, then you'll go and you'll find other Bitcoiners on the internet and you'll all group together and you'll make libertarian arguments and you'll make projections about where the Bitcoin price is going. Similarly, if you're into gold or whatever it is, but you know, there's similar groups in, you know, Marxists, you know, who think we need to go back to Marxism, or, you know, different ideas attract different groups. And there is a network of people who think they know better than you and they want to plan the world in which we live. And, you know, if I was invited to Davos, I'd probably go. And, you know, I'd go and hang out with Tony Blair and Emmanuel Macron and Klaus Schwab and all the rest of them. But they genuinely believe the world they're designing is better. I don't subscribe to that, but they're big state planners and they're probably social democrats of one form or another, and they don't see anything wrong with many of the hypocritical things they come out with. So there is definitely an agenda of powerful people who are trying to impose their view on the world. That's what we do with ideology. We try and make the argument, impose it on other people. So there is something going on.
Why did you say that the World Economic Forum is awful?
Because I don't agree with that Blairite world view.
Which is?
Well, for a start, that we know better than you. They're big believers in state planning. Like when Blair started out, he seemed to be quite libertarian, but you know, there's this whole, you know, pro-EU. I'm not a fan of the EU. I think that the more decisions that are made locally, the better. And, you know, a decision, when you get top-down decisions made by bureaucrats, I think it's awful. I don't agree with state money. I think what's happened to the housing market as a result of state money and the way it's priced out the young is awful. And I just don't, I'm not a technocrat. those guys are technocrats.
Okay. Is Bill Gates the Antichrist?
Probably.
So he's got this.
You're asking me about all this stuff. There are people who know way more about all this than I do, but
I actually just wrote that in there for a bit of a laugh. But yeah,
okay.
you see, I do engage with the tens of thousands of people that comment on my videos, and a lot of people seem to have a big issue with Bill Gates and how much he seems to be taking into his own hands.
I'll tell you where Bill Gates is an antichrist. Is that, for a start, Bill Gates was very lucky to have been born when he was born in the late 1950s. And you look at the 2, 3, 4, 5, big internet billionaires of that early era, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and a couple of others. They were all born within like 6 months of each other. And it's one of those things, right place, right time in history. So they were just around and young at the right time in the evolution of computers. So they were lucky in that respect. I'm not doubting that Bill Gates is clever. But you talk to other computer programmers, he wasn't like a genius computer programmer or something in the way that some people were. But his dad was a patent lawyer. And where Gates's genius came in is that he patented everything. And he made his billions as much from being in the right place in the right time and being, I've got no doubt he got A star in all his computer science things. He's clever, but his brilliance was in his patenting. That's where he made his fortunes. And again, I'm Mr. Free Market, and I think patents. I like them when they suit me, but on the whole, they're quite crony capitalist.
Has he not, though, put billions into helping remove some disease from the world, or nearly? Hasn't he virtually single-handedly nearly removed polio, for example?
Possibly, I don't know.
Yeah. And attracted, I think, 32 billion from Warren Buffett for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
They're mates. Well, it's his money, he does what he likes with it, and he's got his worldview and his ideology, and he's doing his bit to impose it, and he's doing what he considers good work. So, but there's definitely a dark and sleazy side.
What is that dark and sleazy
side?
side?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking. He was involved with Epstein, and there's a lot of nasty. I mean, I don't know if they're true or not, but there's a lot of nasty rumours, and nobody seems to have been prosecuted. And what's going on there?
Right. Okay then. How should the current tax system change?
We should go to taxing people 10 or 15% flat rate income tax. And we should replace as many taxes as possible, just get rid of them altogether and replace them with what Henry George called the single tax, which is instead of taxing labour and productivity, you tax land use, particularly in city centres. The more land you occupy in city centres, and the more, because land in a city centre becomes valuable because of the community. And the only stroke of genius, how much is Buckingham Palace multiplied in value over the last whatever? Well, that's because everyone wants to see it. And, how much has a shop in Oxford Street gone up in value? It's because everyone shops in Oxford Street. It's not because of any brilliant, the guy who owns the shop hasn't created some fantastic new thing that's made the world better. He just owns a shop in Oxford Street. So if you want exclusive rights to, and I'm talking about the unimproved value of the land. So if you build a house on it, it's a fantastic house, fine. The house is yours, but the land in its unimproved state, we tax that.
And is that going to generate enough tax revenue for the government?
No, and that's the beauty of it, because it's a transparent tax. And it means that the landowner's going, well, I'm paying this much tax, and you're not delivering, so I'm going to elect somebody else. And it's a very healthy relationship between citizen and government.
What do you think?
It won't happen because the evidence of history is if you try and raise new taxes during times of peace, you get deposed. You need some kind of crisis to levy a new tax. And, you know, a war or something, or in the case of quantitative easing, you know, a financial crisis. So I don't think land value tax is going to happen, but it's a simple, easy to administer, pure tax, and it keeps the power balance between citizen and government in healthy balance.
Something that perplexes me is that in 2008, when there was a banking-led crisis, banks were bailed out by governments. Yet we're in a cost of living crisis and the government seem to be doing nothing. And when I say doing nothing, there's no windfall taxes for oil and gas companies, which profits are soaring when people are choosing between heating and eating. They reduced VAT in 2008 in the banking crisis. They haven't reduced VAT. In fact, they've increased corporation tax from 19 to 25%. So why are the government not intervening this time round?
Well, I don't know. You'd need to ask them that, and I think they're really panicking about it, and I think they probably know that if they don't do something, or it doesn't go away, they're going to lose the next election. But I don't think imposing windfall taxes is an answer. I think if you look at every inflation in history, corporations have been blamed for profiteering during that inflation, and the leaders go for them. If you want to know why inflation's runaway inflation, it's because they printed loads of money and they locked the economies down and it broke up supply chains, and then a man decided to go and invade another country, and that everyone panicked, and that set off supply chains. But you know, why is oil so expensive? Because for 15 years there's been this, probably longer, there's been this narrative that fossil fuels are evil and that we need to get rid of fossil fuels. So we've taxed them to death. We've had this moral argument against them. We haven't invested in them. People, if you actually look at what fossil fuels have made possible for humankind, they've made wonderful things possible. It's a unique, cheap energy source, and we should be embracing it. But instead they've attacked it. As a result of the lack of investment, supply's dried up and the price has gone up. So and a windfall tax would just be one more attack on it. It's not going to make if you want to make get rid of the cost of living crisis, get rid of taxes on fuel. There's your bailout.
I want to talk about billionaires and corporations run by billionaires, because I think they're two separate things. People tend to group them together, but there seems to be a fairly big hatred of big tech companies and billionaires, certainly in UK society and culture. Not everywhere, but you know, I see a lot of it. So let's talk about big tech corporations first. Why are they not made to pay corporation tax like all other companies, and should they be?
Because their business models are digital and borderless, and tax systems are designed around physical economies, and the tax systems have not adapted.
And should they have adapted?
Yeah.
And why haven't they adapted?
Because I can't tax, if I'm in England or if I'm in Britain and your corporation profits are in Holland, I can't tax you. Because it's in another jurisdiction.
Okay, so let's go to billionaires then. So should billionaires be taxed more?
No, should be taxed less. Everyone should be taxed less. Billionaires, you know, I mean, I think to become a billionaire, you've probably got to be a little bit of a psychopath and have a ruthless streak to you. But also billionaires create wealth. They create a lot of employment. They you know, create opportunities for people.
Advance the world often.
Often they do, like Bill Gates.
Well, many are engineers, aren't they?
Many, often.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm not saying all billionaires are good or all billionaires are bad, but taxing billionaires isn't going to cure the fact that most government services are crap.
And how do we improve government services?
Have the government not supply them.
So let's actually come
If you want to see incompetent government at work, look at the Russian army. I mean, it's just hopeless. It's not only is it incompetent, it's horrible stuff they're doing, and it's horrible to the Ukrainians, but it's also horrible to the Russian soldiers themselves. You know, so many mothers are going to lose their son or have already lost their sons, and it's, you know, the kit's rubbish, the tanks aren't properly made, the planning's all up the spout, and it's because everyone's too, you know, it's corrupt, and then nobody will tell Putin. You know, wants to man up and tell Putin the truth, and so because they'll get executed. You know, it's most things that are wrong in the world can be traced back to some kind of government incompetence somewhere along the line.
Is Putin richer than Elon Musk?
That's an interesting question. I don't know, but. You imagine one has hid his wealth a lot better than the other.
And
what's interesting is I would imagine Musk is richer, but
so why did Elon Musk say Putin is richer?
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, then maybe Putin is.
The Tsars of Russia own everything.
Wealth of the Russian oligarchs is mostly built from commodity wealth. And, you know, because Russian is a commodity-rich country, its economy is built around producing commodities, grains, energies, metals, and so on. And most of that was seized with the fall of the Soviet Union and so on. So it's tangible physical wealth. But what we've seen in the last, 30, 40 years is the rise of a new form of wealth, which is digital wealth. And the digital economy has grown at a far faster speed than the physical economy has, because digital is more scalable, and so and also because it's much less heavily regulated. And you know, you look at something like you own a mine. Well, if the copper price falls and the mine becomes economic, you have to close down the mine, and you know, mining is very capital intensive and it's a very difficult business, mining. Whereas, you know, you just design an app and everyone really likes the app, and a billion people around the world download your app off the App Store. Well, you've only had to design it once and stick it on the App Store, and then a billion, you know, so there's a scalability to the digital economy, and that's why it's grown so quickly. And I think Musk, you know, where's his money? PayPal? Well, that's a digital thing. Tesla's sort of, it's sort of physical, but it's also digital as well. Space, what's his other company?
Good question. I should know.
Another way that Musk has made, I thought he had three things, but again, he's also played the green card very well, and so he's secured a lot of subsidies, and a bit like Bill Gates.
Neuralink,
what does that
do?
do?
The boring company.
What does it do?
Neurological research company.
Okay, well, I don't know, but anyway, in any case, a lot of Musk's wealth is less tangible than Putin's. So I would say, you know, trademarks, patents, IP, all the rest of it. I don't imagine Putin has any of that. So any of that kind of wealth. So if we're in a commodity super cycle and you know, oil's going to $150 and copper's going to whatever, then Putin's probably richer. But if we go into a commodity bear market like we saw after 2011, then Musk's probably the man. But tech is currently declining in value relative to tangible.
Right. Rishi Sunak's wife was paying no tax in the UK, and because of public pressure and perception, reversed that and decided to pay tax in the UK. What did you think about that?
Well, I was amused by the whole story, and you know, they buckled under public pressure. She's a digital nomad, and basically, you know, I talked about the new non-doms, where, you know, more and more workers will become non-dom, and I guess if she's an Indian national and she pays her taxes in India, why should she have to pay tax twice? You know, that's unfair. But, and you know, she, again, with the whole argument, She pays her VAT, she pays her council tax, she pays her fuel duty, she pays all those taxes. It's just tax on her worldwide income that she doesn't pay here. Now, if she's got non-dom status, but then if she's here for more than 6 months a year, then maybe she isn't a non-dom. But I bet you the income tax she pays in India isn't that high. So I'm sort of ambivalent about it, but there's a lot of hypocrisy. And for you to be the Chancellor's wife, and for all the people that you're telling what to do as the Chancellor, you've got to do this and you've got to pay this tax and that. Meanwhile, your wife's not paying income tax. It's not a good look. But whenever the argument of tax comes up, he doesn't pay tax. And it's a common failing of both sides, but it's really common in the left. They cannot distinguish between income and capital. And, I bet you, Richard Branson's income isn't that high. And in fact, I know for a fact it isn't, because I used to know his number 2 very well, and Richard just deliberately reinvested any profits he made so he wouldn't have to pay tax on them. Tax was leakage, they used to call it. But billionaire wealth does not derive from income. It derives from the appreciation in the value of their real estate, their companies, their fine art, their financial assets, whatever it is. And most times that is not taxable unless you sell. And so most don't, because otherwise they're going to have to face a tax event. And there's this inability to distinguish between capital and labour. And in fact, that's one of the reasons society is so unequal, is we tax labour very heavily. We barely tax capital at all.
And when you say the inability to distinguish capital versus income, do you mean a lack of desire to, or just a fundamental
just
inability?
Ignorance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I don't know what Richard Branson's income is, but I bet you, and I'm just using him as a random example, but I bet you most of his companies pay most of his expenses. And, most people, to live a normal life, I bet you his actual personal income is probably only 100 grand or 2 grand, or 200 grand or something. And, most of that he'll pay. And I'm not talking about all the money that goes to him that he spends, but most of that will just be done through his companies. And if he's in wherever he is, if he's in America running his space company, well, all the time that he'll be in America, the space company will pay his expenses because he's there on business. So there isn't an income event there.
Could you argue that's just smart money management?
It is. Of course it's smart money management. That's what most people do, is they rearrange their business affairs so as to minimise tax.
And also...
That's one of the reasons they're rich.
And all that reinvestment that's gone to grow their companies and create those jobs.
Yeah.
That might not have been reinvested.
Yeah, well, exactly. He spends his money better than the government does, for sure.
Well, this is one thing I wanted to talk about, because the government are a legally insolvent enterprise. I run a business, and if I trade insolvently, I can go to prison for that. The government seem to be able to trade insolvently and have no consequences.
Yeah, and if you spend your company's pension money on current expenses, that's accounting fraud, but that's what the government does with national insurance. It's supposed to be insurance, it's supposed to be in a pot, but they spend it. If that was a bit...
they also spent some of the national lottery money.
Yeah, well, it's what Maxwell did. And, the government does the same with national insurance. It's totally hypocritical.
How do we then change things? So you proposed a fairly flat 10% tax rate. How can we change things? Because we could argue nothing's going to change, but if we don't speak out and try and push for change, then definitely nothing will change.
Well, the political system in the UK is designed to prevent change. You get your little vote every 4 or 5 years, but what difference does it make if you choose Labour or Tory? You're going to get some sort of social democratic blob with an expanding civil service. It just makes no difference. Voting has no impact. And Peter Thiel wrote a good essay called The Education of a Libertarian in, I think it was 2008, 2009. And he said you can't achieve political change through politics. And the ways you you achieve political change is either new technology, i.e. the internet, and that's happening. You know, we talked about the internet, the globalized medium. As more and more people work on the internet, become global citizens, they're going to leave the system, and countries with existing borders are going to unable to sustain their spending, and so they'll eventually break up and fall apart. Some of them will, and I think if you look at the borders of the world in couple of generations' time, it's going to look very different to the borders of the world today. You're going to see countries break up. But the other way Thiel said you achieve political change is through new frontiers. And he talked about space, seasteading, under the sea, you know, new places. And again, they're trying seasteading, but nobody can get it to work. And a few people are trying, you know, there's a little bit of land that's been occupied between Moldova and Croatia. I think it's Moldova and Croatia, called Liberland. I've got the countries wrong. It's Croatia and maybe Croatia and Slovenia. And it's like no man's land, and some guys occupied it and set up the independent Republic of Liberland, which he's planning to turn into the world's greatest tax haven. But, you know, to be recognised as a country, you need UN recognition. There's no way the UN's going to recognise an international tax haven. It doesn't want people, you know, buying up land and setting up new countries. It's because of the international technocratic organisations rule. So it's very, very difficult. And I think you just got to look after your own house, look after your own life, live the life you want to live. If you're young, leave, and, you know, become a digital nomad. If you're slightly older, you know, educate, read, minimise your expenses, and just adjust your life as best as possible. But don't save, keep your money in gold and Bitcoin, don't save in sterling.
Because of inflation?
Well, partly because it'll lose its value, but if you keep your money in sterling, you're endorsing the system. Whereas if you keep your money in non-government assets that have no liability, then you're getting your wealth out of the system.
And then just draw as and when you need, because you still need to rely on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole movement that says save in Bitcoin and borrow in dollars.
Until Bitcoin crashes.
And well, that's the problem.
So the thing is, it's
a hell of a risky trade.
Yeah. But you could diversify though, can't you? You said gold, which is less volatile. Mm-hmm. Physical assets, maybe.
Yeah.
Watches are tradable to a certain degree, aren't
they? They get, you know, but there's a lot of talk about wealth taxes, which would effectively be taxes on capital, but they're very hard to actually make work on a practical basis. And governments will always tax where it's easy to collect. You know, there was talk about an unrealised capital gains tax.
It's the most ridiculous proposition known to mankind.
Yeah, so
ridiculous.
So imagine if you'd had an unrealised capital gains tax on your Bitcoin last year when it went to $65,000.
Yeah.
And then, or on your Luna.
Yeah.
And then and then you lost all your money on your Luna.
Who decides what the gain is? Them. And who values it? Them. When's it claimed? By them. And then when it goes to nothing or halves or quarters in value, what, they're going to pay it all back? That's a ridiculous concept ever.
Absolutely. It's just...
They're clutching at straws.
Well, it's easy to say these things, but it's very hard to actually do it in practice. You get that. It's not just tax. You get that with so many policies. People go, well, we should do this and do that. And it's, okay, fine, but how do you actually do it? Like the other one I was arguing with somebody, reparations for slavery. This girl I was talking to the other day was demanding reparations for the slave trade. And I personally don't think there should be reparations for the slave trade because it was so long ago. And, you know, if you start doing reparations for one evil committed in history, then every evil committed in history needs to be made good. And then there's a load of other reasons which are besides the point. But the logistics of actually going, who pays? Like, so for example, my ancestors were Italian, so they weren't actually, actually half of my ancestors were here in the early 18th century when we had the slave trade, but the other half weren't. So do I only have to pay half reparation? And then what if, so my ex-wife was half Jamaican, so does she only, because she was only half Jamaican, not wholly, does she only gets half reparation? And you know, do you see what I mean? There's it's just the practicalities of going, and then they go, well, you know, this, because this whole argument was going on with when the Royal Prince William and thing were in the Caribbean. They were talking about reparations. But so does the English government pay it to the government of Jamaica? Well, why should the government get it? Why shouldn't the people get it? And then you go, well, and what about all the people who pay tax into the English system who just weren't here? So it's you know, no matter what you think of the ethics of the argument, the actual practicalities of putting the policy in place are, it's just very difficult to do. So you see it's a common thing is you argue for some policy based on principle without actually looking at the practicalities of it. And and that's just another example.
And does that link back to the reason why they tax employees at source? Because that's just super easy.
It's an easy tax to collect.
So,
but it's going to get harder because freelancers pay tax after the event.
Right.
It's one of the reasons, I don't know
so
if you've
freelancers
noticed.
Like a self-employed person. So
they're
paying tax later.
Yeah. They get their money and then they pay
Yes.
tax. But and all the studies have shown that a freelancer and a employed person doing the same job, the freelancer will end up paying much lower levels of tax. And it's one of the reasons why there was a big move with Gordon Brown and all that to get, you know, individual limited companies and all this, that and the other. And now they're trying to get people back in the system because they're realising that people are paying less tax.
Yeah,
you know, back into PAYE and
they're coming down hard on self-employed people who
really
work for.
That's why corporation tax has gone up 24% and 25%, whatever it is.
Yeah. I just hate it. Right, okay. Bitcoin is crashing and people are panicking. What's the future of cryptocurrencies?
My new theory is that money is communication. You know, we communicate with words, but often what you do says more about you than what you say. And what you do with your money, it's an essential form of communication within a society. What is this worth? You know, value is communicated through society by price. Okay, so money's an essential form of communication. It's just how we all think. We know that this is worth this and this is worth that and you're worth this and you're worth that. It's how the whole of society functions like that. So in that sense, money is a language. And if you think of all the languages there have been in history, you know, some language, you know, Welsh or Cornish or languages die out and other languages replace them. And you look at English, you know, there's I don't know, not millions, but tens of thousands of words that have been spoken in English throughout history that we no longer use. You look at Shakespearean English, Dickensian English, Chaucerian English, they're almost unrecognisable from English that we speak today. But English is still English. So language is an organic, constantly evolving thing. Very hard to regulate. Although there's been plenty of government that's tried. And you ban one word, people will just start using another one. But anyway, the English, despite the fact that probably is getting smaller as a language, in that we're making do with fewer words, grammar's getting a lot more simple, we're using far fewer tenses. So it's, you know, I imagine Shakespeare or Dickens's vocabulary was far bigger than you know, a great writer living today or the average person living, well, of course it's bigger than the average person, but, you know, so the size of the language might be shrinking, but English is still the dominant language in the world. I think more people speak, is it Mandarin or Cantonese, than speak English. But by the time you factor in English as a second language, you have to go, well, English is going to become, I mean, it already is the dominant language of the world, and it will be it's only going to get bigger as more and more people learn it. It's the language of commerce, it's the language of media and so on. Bitcoin is English. Do you see what I mean? Bitcoin is the growing international monetary language, not the US dollar, because, you know, it's very hard to get a US dollar account if you're outside of the USA. The US dollar is the international language of you know, commodity prices and so on, but it's anyone. All you need to be able to start receiving Bitcoin for your work is a phone with an internet connection, and Bitcoin is the default cash system of the internet. Bitcoin is English.
So could you say it's the evolution of money?
Yeah.
And I guess new forms of money are often quite disruptive and not always accepted by government.
100%. But I mean, more and more people are starting to accept Bitcoin in payment of taxes, but it, you know, money never stops evolving. It's a technology. It's always evolved in the same way that language constantly evolves. Even fiat money, nobody's planned the fiat money system. It's just evolved. But Bitcoin is better.
Why is Bitcoin better?
Because it's sounder, it's faster, it's international, it's cheaper, it's apolitical, it's, you know, it's the most powerful computer network and the most resilient computer network ever invented in all history.
So why does Charlie Munger think it's rat poison, and why would Warren Buffett not buy all of Bitcoin for $25?
Well, he would, because they're all fuddy-duddies and they don't get it.
He said he wouldn't buy all of Bitcoin for $25.
Well,
he said he'd buy 1% of all real estate in America for billions, tens of billions.
You know, he understands real estate. He understands those markets. He's you know, well, I remember when I started going to Bitcoin conferences. I was born in 1969, and I go to like gold conferences, mining conferences. I'd be the youngest person there. I go to Bitcoin conferences. I'd be the oldest person there. It's a young person's thing. You're younger than me, so you probably get it. But you know, they're just old fuddy-duddies. They don't get it. And you know, Warren Buffett is good. He's media friendly. He's good on headlines. He's good on snap things. And you take a position on something, and his position has been that it's crap, and you dig in.
A lot of people have lost their shirt at the moment, though. People
not on Bitcoin.
But they've been gearing up and leveraging on Bitcoin.
That's different.
Their taxes are now more than their value of their Bitcoin portfolio.
But that's levered betting and owning the cash system itself are different.
So do you think
if they've lost their shirts, it's not because of Bitcoin? I mean, of course, Bitcoin price has fallen, but you know, all they're investing in, and I have a huge amount of sympathy for anyone who's in this situation, and I have lost a lot of money in the past before, and I know how horrible it is. You feel ashamed, and you start feeling like you've betrayed your family and all this stuff, and it's quite easy to get suicidal. So don't think I don't have any sympathy with people who've lost money. But bottom line is, and they were speculating in these things because they wanted to make their life better and their family's life better. I get it. I totally get it. But they were speculating in shitcoins, and they were using leverage. And leverage is a fantastic thing when it works in your favor, but when it doesn't, it's horrible. And to quote Warren Buffett, it's only when the tide goes out that you find out who's been swimming naked.
So is the smart play with Bitcoin
Own
to
it
just
and
hold
forget
forever?
about it. I think so, till something better comes along.
Is it a problem that it's not really a currency like it's supposed to be?
What do you mean?
Well, it was supposed to be used as a currency.
Well, it does get used.
Well, hardly. It's not really a practical currency.
I use it all the time.
You use it all the time?
Yeah, to pay people and to receive payment. Yeah, well, it's so easy.
Right.
You're not using you're obviously not using the Lightning Network, but it's like if somebody does a job for me that's like, or I owe them a tenner or 50 quid or something, or even an expensive job, and you go, do you want to be paid in Bitcoin or do you want to be paid in fiat? You know, and particularly if it's in another country, it's just so much easier to use Bitcoin.
Okay, so most people aren't using it as a currency. Hey, I'm not anti, by the way.
Yeah.
I love disruptions because that's where you get progress.
Yeah.
So I'm keen on virtually all disruptions. I found, the London black cabbies all protesting against Uber. Found it really fascinating because for 20 years you'd get in a black cab and someone would be fairly rude, it'd stink a piss and there'd be no charger.
Yeah.
And then Uber came along and they were polite, and so
Yeah.
I love progress. But most people do not know how to buy Bitcoin. Most people do not know how to set up a wallet. Most people are very confused and overwhelmed, and so it's not yet a ubiquitous currency anywhere near. So
Well, they need to sign up to my Substack.
Well, go on then. Let's have a
newsletter.
pitch. Yeah, what's this?
Frisby.substack.com, and I have a newsletter that I write twice a week. It's free, but there's a paid version you can get as well. But I write about everything. In midweek I write some market commentary, and then at the weekend I write more sort of thought-provoking piece. But
on cryptos, you mean?
No, sometimes Bitcoin,
Yeah.
sometimes others. Like this week I wrote about gold, why gold's a primal instinct. Last week I wrote about the demographics of primary schools in the UK and how that will be the demographic, because nobody quite knows what immigration is, for example, in this country at the moment. And people who come to this country who maybe shouldn't be here, have come illegally, don't fill in the census. So the census is no longer an accurate measure of population. Nobody knows. But if you look at, there's two ways you can look at GPs, because most people will sign up for a GP, but I just look at primary schools, and you look at the demographics of a primary school, and you go, that's going to be the demographic of the country in 25 years' time. So that's an example of a thought thing I write. But I do write a lot about Bitcoin, and I've lost my way slightly. I was selling my newsletter. Frisby.substack.com, and it's free.
Why do you use Substack over email? Because you were telling me about it.
It's Substack. If you don't know Substack, I would really urge you to check it out. It's fantastic if you're a consumer of content. It's a really good way to find writers who write about subjects you're interested in and follow them, or just writers you like. It's also a podcast and a thing, but as a producer of content, it's a really good platform. It's in the ascendancy, but it's a fantastic new platform. I can't speak highly enough of it. It's really good. But more and more people are entering the Bitcoin space for sure. But I do accept that it is still a bit geeky and techy, but it's a lot easier than you realise.
Okay.
And as I say, you own a little bit of Bitcoin, it's like you're owning shares in the most powerful, resilient computer network ever invented. Now, why would you not want to own some shares in that?
You seem to like decentralization.
Yeah. I know what I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
The cabbies. You talking about the cabbies. I was
Yeah.
interested. I felt really sorry for the cabbies when Uber came along, but I had a car and I had leased a car, and the lease on the car ran out, and I started using Uber before I got the new car. This would be about 2013, 2014, 2015, around about then. And I was like, this is great. And I never ended up buying a new car. And actually, as a result of not buying a new car, I started using black cabs again in a way that I hadn't previously, because all the money I would have spent on the car, I just got taxis everywhere. And so it was really good for a bit. And I was like, Uber's half the price of a black cab. The black cabs have had their little monopoly for ages. They've refused to improve, adapt or die. So I felt sorry for them, but I also felt, the knowledge.
Evolution doesn't feel sorry for anyone.
No,
does it?
it doesn't. It's cruel. And the knowledge. My uncle was a black cab driver, and he would always go on about his massive frontal cortex, because they're part of the brain that has to make quick, instantaneous decisions is really pronounced in cabbies because of the knowledge, and they have to plan the routes in their head. But then sat-navs came along, and you get Google, and it tells you where the traffic is. That part of the brain's no longer necessary, and you see most cabbies now use sat-navs. But anyway, Uber came along, it's half the price, and I was like, I'm just going to use Uber, and I'll use a black cab thing. But then, some point in the last couple of years, Uber's just got crap. It's got really, really bad. And I mean, black cabs are so expensive, but you know, they are good. And so they seem to be winning the war. But one thing that happened as a result of Uber and black cabs is that suddenly you could pay with a credit card in a black cab, whereas previous you couldn't. They resisted that. And it's like, nobody's got cash anymore. Just get a credit card machine. And the reason they did it, they wanted the cash and tax.
You can't blame them.
Yeah.
Well, can you blame them?
But now they're like, oh, actually, you know, so Uber forced that improvement. So actually black cabs, and then during the lockdown, Uber had a lot of problems and black cabs got really good again. And a lot of black cab drivers are like, I've never had it so good as this year. So there's, and it's not during the lockdown, after, in the post-lockdown thing. The actual lockdown for black cab drivers must have been terrible.
Of course.
Same as comedians. Kill them.
Sounds like a good advert for free market capitalism, what you've just said there.
It is and it isn't, but
Fair
I don't know what's
competition.
happened to Uber. I went to Prague and Uber was fantastic. This 3 weeks ago, but Uber in London's just crap.
So free markets, you said you're a fan of free markets. Could you argue, though, that there needs to be some intervention?
Well, yeah, you could, but if you're a purist, the answer is no.
What about child labour? I mean, that was probably a good intervention to get rid of that, wasn't it?
I think the wealthier people get and the more money they have, the more society advances and bizarrely, the better they behave.
Right.
You do things when you're poor and desperate that you would just not do when you are rich and comfortable. So I think, you know, I don't think child labour would be a thing in a free market. I just don't think I think the wealth created and the moral thing just wouldn't stand for it.
I think we'll do a quick fire round.
Sure.
But just before, solutions. How can people save tax, minimise tax?
Well, one possibility is not working as hard. The unfortunate nature of welfare is that some people, you get to a sort of low threshold and people are like, I don't need to work.
That's not going to get us out of the...
No, but like my girlfriend's Irish and she was just telling me about the furlough money and the housing benefit. And when everything opened up again, there was just a whole class of people like, I'm not going back to work. Why should I go and work in a shop? I'll get paid about 10% less for not working. I may as well not work. Do a bit of moonlighting. Don't tell the tax man. So, you know, one way is not to earn anything, but I assume your viewers and listeners are industrious people who want to better their lives and better their lots and improve things. So that's not an option for them. You just have to manage your affairs in such a way as to be, you know, they make the laws. It's incredibly complicated. I think our tax system is equivalent to 14 times the length of all the Harry Potter books combined.
Wow.
It's just so big and complicated, but the result is there's plenty of loopholes. Become a freelancer if you can. You know, just have a good accountant and make sure you manage your affairs so as to be legally compliant, but also tax efficient.
Meaning knowing what you can run as an expense.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah.
Be
Okay.
careful when you sell things, when you buy them, you don't hit yourself with a huge capital gains tax can be crippling. And, you know, for most people, capital gains tax is like a once in a decade event. You know, if they sell their company or they have some big liquidity thing, and to suddenly wallop them with like my mum bought a flat in, would have been 1981, and it was worth something like, I forget what the number is, but just I'll make up some numbers. She bought it for something like 30 grand. And if she were to sell it today, I think it's worth like $1.5 million or something. So she would have to pay capital gains tax on, you know, from 30 grand to $1.5 million. But you sort of think, well, come on. It's just, that's what's happened there is the incremental effects of 10% one year, 10% one year. And there should be some kind of way of offsetting that, but there isn't. And she could actually do with that money.
Well, you can refinance and take some of it as a
Well,
loan.
that's what she's been forced to do, but and that's the backfires. But so the result is that she just sits on a flat that has a crappy yield. There's much better ways to invest that money, but she can't. The tax system as it's designed and the stamp duty and all the rest of it, she's just like, I'll just keep it. I don't want to pay that capital gain because it's 28% she would have to pay.
It's crazy. And then when she dies, it's even more.
Well, it'd be 40.
Ah.
So,
Yeah.
but do you see, like, but if the taxation was more sensible, she would sell it, somebody else could buy it, and there'd be more activity in the property market.
This thing, if the taxation was more sensible, people wouldn't be so anti-paying it and stop paying it and avoiding it, and therefore there'd probably be more liquidity.
That's the surprising evidence of places that have low taxation is that revenue actually increases when tax rates are lower, because people are happier to pay it.
What's that tax bell curve? Have you heard of that one?
Yeah, the Laffer curve.
That's it, and there's an optimum, isn't there?
Well, there's an optimum point if you're the government, where you get the maximum return.
Yeah.
But
and they must be way out. Our government must be way over that.
The problem with the Laffer curve is it encourages government to find the optimum point, whereas I think government should be doing much less, and so they should be on a lower point on the curve. But ancient Greece, they had voluntary taxes, and people paid more than they were expecting to, because it became a virtue thing. Look at me, I've built this fantastic building for the community, blah, blah, blah. And so that's, voluntary taxes inspire loyalty in the state. The way things are now, people pay the absolute minimum that's possible. Why not have a society where rates are much lower and you can have voluntary? You actually cannot voluntarily pay taxes now. You can't go, I want to donate £10,000 to the UK government. It's not possible to do that.
Right.
There's no GoFundMe. but the evidence is when you have a more voluntary society, that people feel greater loyalty to it, and they donate more. Anyway.
Should we do the quick fire round?
Sure.
So we're looking for about 15 seconds per answer.
Yeah.
A few celebrities over the years have been caught out by HMRC for incorrect tax. Jimmy Carr, 50 Cent, Floyd Mayweather. Do you blame people like this for trying to avoid higher taxes?
I blame the system.
If you could get rid of one form of tax, which one would it be and why?
Well, the one that everyone hates is stamp duty, because it's a regressive tax, but I'd get rid of income tax.
If you could impose one form of tax, what would it be?
Land value tax.
Could you just explain what that means?
Land value tax, it's a tax on the land that you use, but I would. The problem when you say land value tax is farmers all think they're going to get penalised, but it's city centre real estate, and the idea is you tax what you use, and you don't tax what you produce. Income tax is a tax on what you produce.
And you like that because then it encourages labour rather than disincentivises it?
100%.
What's the best advice you ever received?
Don't sell your house.
What's the worst advice you ever received?
Sell your house and buy gold.
What one thing is wrong with the world that you'd like to change?
There's too much government, and it needs to be much. All the problems start with government. There's too much of it, and it needs to be much smaller. And then we'd have a much more peaceful, equal world.
This podcast, YouTube channel, show, it's called Disruptors. What does the word disruptive mean to you?
Well, I was told I was disruptive in class at school, whereas I just thought I was entertaining. But disruptive suggests there's a lot of people who on their LinkedIn profile will start claiming they're a disruptor, and I'll go, no, you're not. You're just. But
don't print it on your T-shirt or anything like that.
I'm only kidding. But I guess a disruptor is somebody who causes problems and is a general pain in the arse. But in the case of business and disruption and tech and all that, I think they're a pain in the arse and cause problems, but in a good way. I think that's what you mean by disruptors.
I'm asking for your definition, not mine. Send us to a couple of your books, your social platforms, or wherever you want to.
Well, my first book was called Life After the State. My most recent book is called Daylight Robbery. And I wrote a book about Bitcoin, the Future of Money. First book on Bitcoin from a recognized publisher. But if viewers are to leave with one thing from me, I would say, please sign up to my Substack, which is frisby.substack.com. Frisby.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for
Thank
joining
you
me.
very much, Rob. Thank you very much for having me.
Wow. So let me know what you think about the show in the comments. But before you go, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn the notification bell on.